In this section, we're going to add real numbers together. And you might be thinking, well, I know how to add numbers. And that's great, but really, do you really understand what you're doing? So what we're going to do today is we're going to really show how we are adding numbers together and why we get the answers that we do. And you know what? You say you understand adding, but when it comes to adding with positives and negatives, we tend to make a lot of mistakes. So here we go. How do we add real numbers? So before we get to this, write down what you remember the definition of an integer to be. Use your own words. And what we should have written down is something along the lines of the whole numbers and their opposites. So -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so on. And then also please write down where in this great world of ours do you use integers? And there's a whole bunch of different things you could have written. 3 that I came up with were floors on a building, second floor, third floor, basement, counting, when you count things, and when you deal with money. These are all things that we use integers for. You might have written down any number of other things, and that's great. So we're going to add positive numbers and negative numbers together, and we're going to do that using these things called integer chips. And if you have some in front of you, I want you to actually put the chips in front of you. The red signifies a positive 1, and the yellow signifies a negative 1. And we're going to count these chips as we do it. In your notes, I want you to draw what this looks like, and you can do that using little circles with pluses and minuses in them if you don't have colors. So I want to draw 3 plus 8. What that looks like is 3 chips, 3 red chips, and 8 red chips. And then we can count how many we have. 3 plus 8. I hope that we all know that that's equal to 11. -2 plus -3. What is that going to look like? Well, yellow chips signify negative numbers. So we're going to have 2 yellow chips signifying -2. And then 3 more yellow chips that mean -3. And now we count those. We have 5 yellow chips, which means that our sum is equal to -5 because there's 5 of those yellows. I want you to pause right now and draw what you think the picture should look like for 4 plus 8 and -8 plus -3. So you should have drawn 4 red chips and then 8 more red chips, giving us a total of 12. And then you should have put 8 yellows and 3 more yellows. And so we count them. There are 11 yellows. That means that our sum is -11. And what I want you to do right now is I want you to try to think about what we did and think if you can come up with a rule, a trick, tip, or an easy way to remember how to add 2 negative integers. And I want you to write that down and then keep going with the video, and we'll see if what you wrote down makes sense. So we just looked at adding and subtracting, adding numbers together that have the same signs, 2 positives or 2 negatives, and you came up with what you think might be a trick for doing it, and we're going to formalize a tip for doing it in just a moment. But first, let's look at how we represent adding numbers that have different signs, so a positive and a negative. So I want you to try to draw a picture for -7 plus 4, and then restart the video when you think you have it. So we need 7 of these yellow guys. And then we need 4 reds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, how does this help us? Well, think about what happens when you take +1 and -1 and add them together. They become 0. That's what we call a zero pair. It's when we have a +1 and a -1 combining to make nothing. So what I can do is I can match these up, these reds and yellows, And we can see that, well, there's how many that don't make a zero pair? There's 3 that don't make a zero pair, and those 3 non-zero numbers are all yellow, so -7 plus 4 is -3. So pause the video and see if you can't draw a picture for these next 3 problems, and then restart it and see if your pictures match mine. So you should have made pictures that look like this. We've got 9 yellows or 9 negatives. We have 4 positives, and then 4 yellows, 4 positives, 4 yellows, 4 reds. And what we now do is we cross out the zero pairs. That's 0. That's 0. That's 0. That's 0. So what's left? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yellow chips left. There's 5 negatives left. So our sum is going to be -5. And then with the 4s, -4 plus +4, we can cross out all these zero pairs. What's left? Well, there's nothing left. So our sum is 0. Now, these last 3, I want you to try and do these again. Pause the video, draw the picture, and this time I'm going to draw the picture using pluses and minuses on one of them and chips on the other, just so you can see what it looks like. So pause, then begin. So what we should see is 7 negatives, 5 positives, and then we have these zero pairs that are crossing out, leaving us with 2 yellows or 2 negatives. So this sum is -2. And then a simple way of doing this, like I said, is with pluses and minuses. So I put 7 or 5 pluses for the +5, 7 minuses, and then I can just circle or highlight the zero pairs. Those all go away. So what do we have left? We have 2 negatives. So this sum is equal to -2. And finally, -6 plus 0. So I would draw 6 negatives and nothing else. So -6 plus 0 is just -6. And again, I want you to try and brainstorm. I want you to try and think. I want you to try and use your mind to develop a pattern that you might be observing, or a trick or a tip for how to remember how to add 2 integers that have different signs. Let's see how you did with these summaries for how to add numbers with different signs or same signs. So adding integers with the same sign, you add the integers and keep the sign. And when we're talking about adding the integers, we're talking about the absolute value of this. So -2 plus -3, they have the same sign. So we add the absolute value of those numbers. So 2 plus 3 is 5. And then we keep the sign the same, which is negative. Adding integers with different signs, we're going to subtract the integers. Again, I'm talking about the absolute value of these integers. And then we're going to keep the sign of the larger number. By larger, I'm talking absolute value of that number. So let's say I have -7 plus 5. What's 7 minus 5? What's the difference between them? That's 2. And then which one of those numbers is further away from 0? The -7. That's the larger absolute value, so that is the sign that we keep. -7 plus 5 is -2. So some quick questions. I want you to pause the video yet again. I know I'm asking you to do that a lot today. I want you to decide what the answer is to each one of these questions. So let's look at the answers. Is the sum of 2 positive integers positive or negative? That's positive. Because when the signs are the same, we keep the sign of the numbers. Is the sum of 2 negatives positive or negative? 2 negatives make a negative when we add them together. Is the sum of a positive and negative always positive? No. It depends on whether the positive number is further from 0 or the negative number is further from 0. What is the sum of an integer and its opposite? It's 0. That's what we call that zero pair. It's the result of having all 0 pairs when we draw that picture. And what's the sum of an integer and 0? It's the integer itself. So finally, here are some practice problems. I want you to pause the video and decide what the sum of all of these are. Do not use a calculator. If you need to draw pictures, but I want you to try and get the answer. Restart and see if you did it right. And here are the sums for each of these problems. If you got any wrong, have a conversation with your neighbor, with somebody who knows what they're doing, or ask your teacher for some help and make sure that you can do these without the aid of a calculator. And that, ladies and gentlemen, takes us to the end of today. Go forth and add.